call the meeting together, the regular meeting of February 16, 2001, with the Pledge of Allegiance, and I'll have Ms. Mary Peasky to say the Pledge of Allegiance for us.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, ma'am. And then we'll go into the roll call, please. So call into the roll.
Sean Washington.
Here.
Mary Martin.
Here.
Marion Carter. Paul Jones Salam.
Here.
Latanya Hill.
Here.
Joe Brooks.
Here.
Marianne Peasky here.
Awesome. Thank you, ma'am. So if we can recite the BCS mission statement. Preparing students for the promise of tomorrow. Or repeat after me.
All right, there's some issues going on with the audio.
There is, okay. Okay, it's working good for me. So what I'll have us to do, if you're not speaking, I'm going to ask everyone to please mute themselves. And I think that might help with some of the, because there's some extra background noises there. All right, so this meeting is a meeting of the Board of Education in public for the purpose of conducting the school district's business. Is not to be considered a public community meeting, and there is time for the public participation during the meeting as indicated in the agenda. And we'll be moving right along to the consent agenda items. First one, the approval of the agenda. Approval of the minutes of the regular meeting of January 19, 2021. Approval of the bills to be paid. General fund account check 74536 to 74610. Food service account check starting, well, it's just one, so 5465046. And then promise authority account checks number 1322 to 1326.
So moved.
Motion that we approve the consent agenda items. It's been moved by Mr. Brooks.
I'll second.
Second by Ms. Peasky. Any questions or comments? All in favor? Aye.
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 All opposed? Motion carried. Okay, presentations. We have the fall to winter data discussion.
I'm going to put this on my screen now, and Mr. Mangum, Mr. Cornwell, and I will share some information that I think the board will be interested in. So is the data and what comes next up there now?
It is.
Yes, it is.
All right, so we are going to give you quite a bit of data in some different areas tonight. We will cover NWEA, We will cover some classroom grades. We will cover some walkthrough data. We will also talk about what our recommendations are as we move through this information. So if you have questions, please ask those questions. And I'm going to go ahead and get started. So just a reminder, our mission is preparing students for the promise of tomorrow. Where are we right now? We are in year 3 of Blueprint installation. We are in year 1 of a K-12 English Language Arts program. We are in year 2 of a K through 12 math program. We're in year 1 of a K through 12 one-to-one unplanned technology integration. We're in the process of putting together the district vision and a strategic plan. We are putting a big focus on the whole child, focusing on trauma, equity, etc. And all of this at the same time, the state is rolling out the introduction to the new school improvement process, MyKIP, as well as the implementation of it at the same time. So we're in the training stages, as I've told you in some of the updates on Friday, but we have a plan that is due to MyKIP by June 30th. So as they are training us about the program, we are preparing to submit right in that program. And that's a change from the old system. So everything so far looks pretty good and fits with where we are. So that's exciting. Things we want to accomplish, we want to create instructional leaders. We want to develop systems. We want to develop processes. We want to reach capacity with professional learning. And overall, we want to improve our academic data. So we'll start off by saying if we pay attention to the right data, we can have the right impact. And we're going to talk about projected RIT growth, which is not adjusted for COVID-19. And RIT is a Roush unit, also known as readiness for instruction. And for example, a 150 is the same at 3rd grade as it is at 8th grade. I want to give you that heads up now because when we dig into the data, we're going to be talking about RIT scores. We're going to be talking about projected and observed growth. So I wanted to fill you in on that ahead of time. In observed growth right now, according to our historical NWEA data, and we've been doing NWEA since 2012, we're growing at a similar rate, similar to past performance, but we are going to acknowledge that it's not enough growth to get us to proficiency, and we'll talk about that as we go through the presentation. What are some factors that affect us right now and have the potential to affect us in a positive way? Attendance and engagement, and we've put a lot of focus on that. We'll be talking about that tonight as well. Instructional quality. Keep in mind, we've turned over 50% of the staff in the last few years, so we have a lot of young teachers who we're bringing up to speed. That's a good thing because they're learning the way we want to do things, but that does impact. Short cycles of improvement. You've seen a couple of presentations about that, how the blueprint improvement cycles work. EWIMS, which is we're focusing on at the secondary level. Mr. Cornwell will talk a little bit about that. And then the MyKIP that I mentioned already. So Mr. Cornwell, Mr. Mangum, we are into the data section. So I'm going to turn it over to you. And I will try to change slides when you give me some kind of signal.
All right, thank you. So this first slide is showing us the last several years worth of data on the mean RIT. This is K-8 data. And one thing I want to point out, and it's on all of these slides, the year 2018, 2019 is got a green highlight under it. That year, the winter test wasn't taken in 6th, 7th, and 8th. So there's a little bit of an anomaly, and that's in that one piece of data in all of our slides because of that that missed test that winter. So what our mean RIT is showing us is it's showing us the average, and remember this is kindergarten through 8th grade test score for all of our students who took the test. Now the RIT's unique, and NWEA puts out a scale and says, you know, a kindergartner should be at this level, a first grader should be at this level, and so on and so forth. You can see that across the board, we're sitting as an average about 180 RIT points, probably somewhere in that ballpark. Mr. Mangum probably could explain the RIT maybe in more depth, but I think if you know that it's the unit that shows where we're ready to learn.
Yeah, a really good way of thinking about is readiness for instruction. So a RIT score lets us know what those students are ready for from an instructional standpoint. That's their proximal zone of learning, right? And that gives us an indicator as to, okay, this student is at a 180. They are prepared to do this in mathematics, this in reading, and it will let us know what those next instructional steps should be for that student.
All right, if you want to jump to the next slide talks about our standard deviation. Now, standard deviation is a little bit tricky. So what it's saying is it takes the average score and it takes the points of the highest score above it to the lowest score below it, and that's your standard deviation. So if your average score is 200 and you have a standard deviation of 15, the highest score was a 215, the lowest score is a 115. When you're talking with NWEA, they're talking about a standard deviation ideally of about 12. That means you've got a pretty cohesive classroom or grade level. Once you get outside of that range of about 12, you start hitting where you have a big difference between your high achievers and your low achievers, and your instructional strategies have to be really varied. I tried to say very varied, but that didn't work, between what you're getting the high students and the lower achieving students.
Yeah. So like a normal, as Mr. Cornwell alluded to, a normal standard deviation is approximately a 12. And what we look at is when we start going below that 12 mark, you have a much more homogeneous group. You don't need to do as much differentiation because their ability levels are much closer together. When we're looking at it from above 12, you start getting into a group that as he stated, you know, you have students at the far ends of the spectrum, some that are lower, some that are higher than that middle piece. And so when you have that, you need more differentiation in the classroom. You also need to build in more scaffolds for students at the lower end, and you also need to build more extension for those students at the upper end. And so it gives us an indicator as to how we can move our students forward in the best manner possible.
So our next couple of slides talk about our projected growth and then our observed growth, and then it breaks it down by subject area. What you need to know about projected growth is when a student takes the test in the fall, NWEA puts out a number where they believe that student, if they're on pace, will be when they get to the winter test. Then when they take the winter test, they give them a new projection out to where they should be when they take the spring test. And then we can compare that to what their actual test scores were at those points to measure their progress. So this is showing that the last slide was what NWEA said we should be hitting, and this is showing where we were hitting. Now this is the average growth in RIT points. So an average growth, like in, if we go back to 2013, the blue column in 2013 showed an average RIT growth of 8 points. So on average, students went up 8 points from their fall test to their spring test. And as you can see here, the last few years, our average observed growth has declined the last couple of years. Mr. Mango, anything you want to add to this slide?
No, I think the next slide is a little bit more telling. So
I would agree.
Yeah. So what we're looking at here is the projected growth versus the actual observed growth. So the projected growth is in the blue, and the observed growth is in the red. And when you see the blue growth, the projected growth is the amount of growth we would anticipate to see in one school year, right? When we're below that, we're not making a year's worth of growth in a year. When we're above that, we're making more than a year's growth in a year. And so ideally where we want to be is we want to be above that projected growth line, because that then indicates that we're starting to close those gaps in achievement, right? We're starting to grow kids faster than they would in a normed standard year of education.
Keep in mind as you look at these numbers that NWEA periodically changes their scale as well. I believe it was in 13 and 17 or 18 that they changed their scales. So some of these differences might be in how NWEA is measuring these. So again, we have the same thing here. This is just the reading scores. The last one was the math scores. Again, the projected growth in blue, if we're below that in red, we didn't meet our year's worth of growth. You know, in 17, 18, we projected we'd grow to, you know, it looks like about 5.8, and we hit 5.8. We met a year's worth of growth on average that year. Any questions on those before we move on to the next little bit of information? It's a lot of NWEA data. So this slide partially came to us from a joint superintendent principals meeting with the ESD about 2 weeks ago, and I thought it was kind of telling. The ESD pulled all of the numbers of semester 1 failing grades across the region. As you can see here, seniors, there were 19% of seniors grades were failing, 28% juniors, 31 for sophomores, 35 for freshmen. That's region wide. Baldwin Junior Senior High School, I just pulled these numbers for the semester. We were at 36 and 31.5% of total grades at the semester time were failing grades. And then the next slide talks a little bit about what we've been doing in the classrooms. Mr. Mangum, do you want to talk about how we've done these walkthroughs?
Sure. So one thing we've been working on is trying to get some process data in place for our implementation of various initiatives that we're working on right now. You know, for my building, it's been around learning targets. I believe yours as well, Mr. Cornwell. That's where we've been diving in for this first part. And when we initially did the walkthroughs, the first thing we found is that they were posted. Learning targets are alive and well in our classrooms. But what we didn't see as readily, right, was that teachers were unpacking those learning targets with their students and helping them to break down what that really means. And then also coming back and evaluating how they did at the end of the lesson around that learning target. And so those were two areas that we wanted to grow in. And so we started to initiate a focus of that in our BCS time, in our professional learning time, along with not only with our ELA implementation of new curriculum, but across the board in mathematics, in science, in all areas. So this is a secondary walkthrough, so I'll let you talk through the data there, Garth. So
sure, it's pretty straightforward, and we'll see a similar slide next with the elementary. I did 11 classroom visits at the start of January and did an additional 9 at the end of January. And in the meantime, what we saw from the first walkthrough was, yes, like Mr. Mangum said, targets are posted. It's interesting posting them online. Some people have slides. Some people put up a Google Doc. There's lots of variation in how they're doing this. And what we were seeing is, yes, they were putting them up, but sometimes they were just the straight standard. It wasn't in kid-friendly language. Sometimes it was with in the I can, you know, I can do this today. Sometimes it wasn't. And what we saw is about half the time they hit all those marks at the secondary. And then after we spent some time focusing on this in BCS, we jumped up to about 77, 78% of the teachers in the classrooms were doing all three of these things, posting them visually, speaking through them verbally. They were in kid-friendly language, and they had a STEM that traveled along with it. And then the next slide is the elementary numbers.
Yeah, and the elementary, we looked at a couple of different things. We really looked at if they were unpacking the learning target, or guiding students to restate that learning target in their own words, defining the key vocabulary in that target. And I think the interesting thing here is when we did that, we did 18 walkthroughs in December, and we did an additional 17 in January. And what we see is in December, we had 27.8% where we were not really seeing that happening, right? And when we came back in January, we saw 17%. So we see teachers making the attempt. Now, when we look at this, we have the orange, which is not evident, the red, which is somewhat evident, and then the blue. I kind of look at that as in orange being we're not seeing it, right? Red, we're seeing the teachers start to try it, right? They're learning it. It's something, it might be something new to them, but they're making the attempt. And blue is really those folks that are really proficient at it. And so I think it's interesting that when we did these walkthroughs, we're not proficient yet. We still have some more work to do, right? We've had a little bit of an increase in that proficiency, but we did see a big jump going from that red group, the number of people that were trying it in their classrooms and making the attempt to unpack those pieces. And I believe when we look at this again in February, right, we're going to see an additional increase in those numbers, and we'll see some more folks moving to that proficient category, and hopefully we'll see those orange not evident pieces go away altogether.
So at the secondary level, we followed the same path of unpacking our targets. And I talked about it a little bit last month. We talked about the difference between identify and describe. And we did that work with our teachers. And what we saw initially is that a couple of them were unpacking those with the students, or students understood what they were getting at. After we spent some time in BCS, and an interesting little aside, we did this work in BCS, and then I was in a classroom less than an hour later, and that first teacher was unpacking it with kids, just like we talked about. And half an hour later, I was in the next classroom, and they were doing the same thing. So teachers really, once they understood what was being asked of them, they jumped right into it. You'll see at the end of the month, we had a significant increase. We had basically over here one teacher, 9% of 11 walkthroughs that was doing it. But at the end, 3 of the 9 were doing it. Another 3 or 4 were really close. They were maybe having students unpack it, but not to the depth at which we want them to unpack it. So we saw a significant increase in not just learning targets posted and then written in kid-friendly language, but then also teachers working with students to understand what that target actually meant for their learning. And I think the next one is an elementary one that's similar to this.
Mr. Mangum, you're muted. Tried to tell you I was muted too.
So what we're looking at here is the end of the lesson, right? Where teachers are revisiting and debriefing around that actual learning target. So ideally what we want to see is that learning target doesn't just happen at the beginning of the lesson. It should come at the beginning of the lesson. We should be revisiting it throughout the lesson. And then we should have some questions at the end of the lesson that also refer to that and kind of a check for understanding. How well did we do? And again, where this was kind of new to teachers, this is really kind of establishing that success criteria and then measuring that success criteria, right? So this is taking it a next step with learning targets that we haven't done before. And in December, of the 10 classrooms where it was appropriate to measure, right, where we stayed and saw towards the end of the lesson where we would see that, about 30% of the classrooms, it was not evident. In 20%, we saw teachers making an attempt. They were learning, and 50% we saw them being really proficient with that. we actually were able to stay for more classrooms in January all the way through. And I think it was really interesting because we cut that number tremendously, right? With very few classes where we didn't see it evident at all. But we saw a lot more teachers trying, doing different things, doing exit slips. We saw a lot of exit slips directly aligned with what we were doing in that learning target. We also saw some student self-assessment type pieces where they rated themselves at the beginning and they rated themselves at the end. And so we're seeing movement in that positive direction where we want to go, where we're hopefully getting everybody into that blue square, right? From a proficiency, from a competency standpoint. But we know that we have more work to do around that, right? So we'll continue to practice those things. And actually, I'll talk a little bit about it. We're layering on these pieces, and we spent a significant portion of February, the first part of February, talking about what might those little assessments look like? How can we, how do we know what students learned through the lesson, right? And then that helps us make those adjustments for what tomorrow's lesson is going to look like based on, do we need to review, or can we move further ahead at a quicker pace, at a medium pace? It just gives us more information on what the next day instruction should look like.
So moving forward, one of the things that we really want to have is a plan for how we can start to make some positive impact given this data. The NWEA data, it does show that students are growing, maybe not as quickly as we'd like them to be growing, but they're growing. So what we're doing at the elementary and secondary levels, and it is really working in small groups and those implementation cycles. At the secondary level, we have our EWIMS team. We talked about last month, that early warning interventions team that's really crunched into the data based on attendance, behavior, and course completion. And then we have the other half of the staff broken up into two groups. One is working on mathematics based on the data from that, and the other in ELA. And they're formulating a couple of simple practical steps that we can put into place starting March 1st and really focus on for the next 4 to 6 weeks to hopefully see some improvement in those classrooms. Similar at the elementary level with what we're doing at the secondary level.
Yeah, so what we're looking at moving away from is looking at data in traditionally we've looked at our data from an NWA standpoint 3 times a year. We would look at some additional data once a month, but it was more individual. What we're really looking at here, I apologize, my dog's barking in the background. But what we're really looking at is identifying outcomes data on short cycles, like as Mr. Carnmore said, 4 to 6 weeks. And so what we've done is we've kind of looked at our committees that we've done in the past, which may have met once per month. We're looking at utilizing our BCS time. So they're looking at things on a weekly basis. They're looking at it through a number of different lenses. They're identifying specific data points that we want to use as indicator data to help us with that outcome goal, right? We'll identify some goals. And then we're also going to establish a feedback loop so that we're checking that data, and once we have that data, we're going to bring it back around so that everyone can see that data. We can make adjustments in real time and hopefully accelerate that growth process. So what you're looking at here is an improvement cycle template. There's a number of pieces on here that I just kind of want to walk us through, and I hope everyone can read it. It's a little bit small, but what you're looking at is obviously you have your committee, and this particular one is just a blank template, but you might have your math committee or your reading committee or your culture and climate committee for my buildings, right? We would have a planned date, which was where we would initiate that, and then we would establish a review date, right? Which is when, hey, this is when we want to check all of that data and then begin the process of feedback. So we start out with that idea of, okay, in 4 weeks, in 6 weeks, we're going to come back to this and see how we did. What that team did, and actually they did it this morning. This was their first, the committees met this morning, and this was their first time working with this particular template. And they were working on identifying some goals around reading, math, or making sure in culture and climate, they were charged with the idea of making sure that students were ready to engage in that content, right? So we talked about some things around student stamina after being, not in an actual in-person classroom. What is that going to look like for students? So how do we build some stamina, develop stamina so that they can do that all day? Because it's been, quite a while since they've been in a traditional classroom. So they identified some goal areas, and then they look at the input or the context, right? What are the pieces that we currently have in place that are going to help us meet that goal? And so they talk through those pieces. Then what they'll start to do is identify process, and they identify process by role. And so there will be universal actions for all. Role, how does the superintendent help with this? How might the district network help with this? What's the role of the building principal or other leaders within the building or the building network, right? That school leadership team. What about our specialists? What's their function in this particular goal, right? So what are our paraprofessionals? What are our interventionists or our coach, our building coach, right? What is their role and function at this? What is the role of the classroom teacher in meeting this particular goal, as well as any other staff that may be able to impact that? So when we think about that, right, as a building principal, I may need to allocate more time to a specific innovation or implementation of an innovation. A specialist might be our instructional coach may need to do some additional training around that. That would all be part of that process, right? Our classroom teachers would actually implement it in the classroom, and our interventionists may be layering on a tier 2 piece for those students that need it a second time. In addition with that, we're going to identify some anticipated outcomes, right? So that's that lighter blue column. And those anticipated outcomes, we're really looking for one of two things. We're looking for an increase in student achievement or a change in instructional practice, right? And what we're looking for with that, anticipating is with that change in instructional practice, the increase in student achievement will follow, right? And so those are kind of big picture data points that's what we're ultimately looking for from that improvement piece, right? What we'll identify though is actual output pieces, right? And those are going to be those leading indicators. So if we see this, we know that we're on track to meet that bigger goal. If we see this, we know that we're on track. If we don't see that, right, then we know that we need to make an adjustment. And what this allows us to do is to adjust in a more real-time fashion. And then all of these pieces filter into a feedback cycle, right? So that not only are we looking at that data, but we're creating a feedback process so that we have the data and we align that with our monthly meeting schedule. So if we start the process, right, we roll through a 4-week cycle, for example. At the end of that 4-week cycle, our building networks meet, right? Those building networks will then take that information, right, and filter that to all staff at the first week of the next month's staff meeting. Then we'll make the adjustments that we need to make. We'll change. If we're on track, we might layer something new on. If we're not on track, we might go and tweak a few pieces that we feel are the reason why we're not on track, right? Additionally, that information will filter up to the district meeting, the district network at the second meeting, the second week, sorry. And then at the board on the third week. And then in the meantime, all of this stuff is continuing to happen. So we'll have a new data set to look at in that 4th week. So it becomes this iterative cycle, right, of improvement that just rolls right along in a 4-week to 6-week schedule. What this allows you to do is just be a little bit more nimble in what you're looking at, allows you to adjust on the fly. And it also aligns very well with MyKIP and the new way that the state is asking us to look at school improvement. So I think it allows us to be more flexible and do school improvement in real time. It allows us to be responsive to the data, and it allows us to I believe, if we do this well, accelerate our achievement, because we'll be paying attention to that data consistently on time and making those adjustments in real time.
The new MyKIP system fits really well with what we're doing, and that's one of the things that we like about this switchover. We were the advanced ed program that we've had for about 20 years. It was clunky, and we had to use their language for the improvement goal plans and objectives, and it was hard to fit their language into what we were trying to do. So what we really like is we're going to be able to create our own true goals and live by them. But it fits well with our partnership. It fits well with the blueprint model. Fits well with the projects we have going with state and federal. Those are some of the systems and processes that we have in place. As far as strategies, capacity, and leadership, we're working on the EWIMS. We're working on equity. We're working on trauma. EWIMS. Mr. Cornwell, what does that stand for? I just lost it.
Early warning, intervention, and monitoring system.
It's as we've talked about before, that really has the potential to be a game changer for us, because we've tried to figure out a way to make that data usable in different teams within the district and as well at the board table, and it's just been difficult, and this just gives us a template to be able to do that. So I'm anticipating that group will probably do a small presentation in March to bring you guys up to speed. As you know, we do NWEA. We talked about that. We may do MSTEP and the PSAT this year. That's up in the air, but we're still doing all the work to get everybody registered and all set for that. We'll wait and see what happens there. And then in the bottom right, I've got I put the COVID-19 effect, because in a normal year or two, you would take a different amount of time to integrate a one-to-one technology initiative, and we did that overnight, and I think we've done it pretty effectively. We still have work to do, but technology integration, the remote learning, and the handout of a lot of computers, we weren't necessarily ready to do that, but we put a plan together and we're able to get those out. And even when the ones we ordered in June finally came in October or so, we were able to do some trade-ins with some kids. So it worked pretty well. But that's kind of a graphic of how we can put all of this information that we've talked about onto one sheet. So again, I want to review where we are. We had this slide earlier, but we're in year 3 of the blueprint installation. We're doing that because we were identified in March of 18 as a partnership district. So we've had great supports, and we've worked very well with all of the teams that are involved with that, from MDE to the folks at the statewide field team. Year 1 of a K-12 ELA program, we spent a great deal of time last year studying what way to go with ELA, and I don't know if this was the perfect year because we were remote to begin rolling it out, but the feedback has been pretty decent about the programs. We're in year 2 of a math program that's new. Again, one-to-one technology, K-12 district vision we're working on, focus on the whole child, and the introduction and implementation of MyKIP. So a lot going on. That is not a exclusive list, but those are some of the big things that we have going on right now. And working together, and by together we mean with the board, with the teachers, with everybody on staff, with the community, with the ESD, we can achieve better than we ever have before. That's our story so far, and as always, go Panthers. So any discussion, questions? I know that was a bit lengthy and a lot to digest. What we want to do is determine a way to begin sharing more regularly data with you, so we don't have to dump a ton of it on you like we did tonight. But If there's anything we can clarify or anything like that, please let us know. So thanks for listening.
That was that was a lot, that was a lot of information, and it will be very helpful to be able to establish a regular ongoing system in the way we can get that information more regularly. But overall, and this would be for both the building principals, you know, we talked about the standard deviation, and we saw that in most years or the last couple of years, that has been above 12.0 for both reading and math, K through 6, right? And then, so what were some of the other takeaways that you feel the data was telling you that you just didn't have time to look into tonight to present? Because I'm thinking that we knew students were growing. We've been watching that happen for like the last, like since 2012, 2013 school year. We've been watching students grow, but we've just been having a tough time getting to that level of proficiency, right? And so when I think about the sizes of our classrooms, and so for me, when we look, and I don't know about other board members, but for me, when I look at the percentage, it's really helpful to know what the number is. So what is the number of those sixth graders? Like how many sixth graders does that percentage represent? Because this is, and I'm trying to get to a question, but bear with me, because I'm trying to kind of talk this out in my head too. So when we look at the K through 12 and we see these percentages of the standard deviation, and we know there's a gap, right? Because that's what that means. But I'm thinking in most situations, you won't have as many kids, for the lack of better words, at the bottom. You will have more of those kids at the top. Is that kind of accurate to say sometimes that happens? For us, me looking at this data, I'm thinking we have more at the bottom than we do at the top. So it kind of gives us an inverted situation. So how do we, and you probably answer that with a lot of things that you're doing, but I just kind of want to throw it out there so you can kind of talk back to me and help me to understand, how do we flip an inverted situation where we have more at the bottom than we do at the top? So that the data, are we going to break the data down even more to say, is it more, let's look at girls versus boys, like where is the, who is it? Who are they? I guess is what I'm trying to say, is like, who are the students, and how do we, you know, kind of switch that, and not even switch it, because we want to keep those kids at the top continue to go. But how do we reach that, I mean, it's a whole class. It's almost like a whole class. I hope I'm making some sense, because I'm really trying to talk it out in my head.
No, you are. I think, you know, that one of the reasons that we want to move to these short cycles of improvement, right, is because it allows us to be more responsive when we're looking at that data. You know, as I mentioned before, we get NWEA 3 times a year. That's not fast enough, right? We need to be looking at things in more frequent and shorter bursts. And so what are those leading indicators? We need to identify what are those leading indicators so that we know kids are on that trajectory to either meet their growth, or in an ideal circumstance, right, we want them to exceed that growth, right? Because if we do that, then we're closing those gaps. We're moving the bar with our students. And so if we look at things in smaller bite-sized pieces, right, we can make those adjustments on the fly to do that. I think the other thing too is it allows us to then look at, okay, this particular group of students is struggling. What do we need to put in place right now to help them, right? How do we utilize our interventionists? How do we utilize our paraprofessionals? How do we utilize, you know, small group work in the classroom to kind of reach those students right now? It allows us to be much, much, much more responsive to the needs of students by looking at those leading indicator pieces in those shorter cycles.
And that also leads into the EWIMS process at the secondary level is really focused on that. It's identifying those students who need intervention, giving them the intervention we can offer, and then checking back with them after 4 or 5 weeks to see how it's progressing and come back to it. We met with Manistee High School last week, Mr. Nason, Mr. Fricky, Lisa Francisco from MDE, and myself. they've been doing EWIMs for, I think, 5 years now, 4 or 5 years now. And they said, really, it's a great process, but be patient. You're not going to get it in year 1. You're going to get the kinks worked out in year 1. You're going to start seeing it in year 2. But we're already identifying the students that we are seeing need in. For example, we have a tier 2 intervention starting on Monday for attendance. We identified those 15 or so % of students who struggled with attendance a year ago. And we're going to be making calls to them, inviting them back when we come back face to face in person. Hey, we can't wait to see you, really build that relationship and rapport for when we get them back in the building, which is a really kind of a minor thing to do. But the hope is that it's just one connection with a kid that gets them excited to come back and maybe take away a barrier. We'll review that again in a few weeks and see how it's going and progress from there. But really, it's the identification of what we can do right now in that short term, put it in place, and then check our work as we go.
I think that the other piece that we want to mention too is it allows us to really look at the intervention that we're trying, and if it's not working, move to the next piece. We want to align our intervention, use the appropriate intervention for what the student's needs are, right? Sometimes we try an intervention and we'll try it for 6 months. Well, it's not getting you to where you need to be. Don't sit on it for 6 months, right? If we're seeing improvement after 4 or 5 weeks, yeah, continue with it. If we're not, let's go back and see if it really aligns with the need of the student.
So in the secondary level, Mr. Cornwell, do you think you'll see 6th, like through 8th grade you normally don't see this, like small groups, like you normally would see like in elementary to kind of support those students if that's what the intervention calls for? You think we'll see stuff like that?
If that's what's going to be called for, then we'll do our best to make that work. The EWIMS team has already put together a pretty extensive list of what we're already doing and what we can do with who we have. There may be need down the road for an interventionist at the secondary, in the middle school. I think the data probably shows that already. It's, the trick is finding the person to do it, but absolutely small group, whatever it's going to take to move that needle.
And I'll add in the other piece of the whole puzzle is, we've got the 2 new curriculums in the big subjects, math and English. And one of the focuses of the professional development is that first best instruction idea, putting the onus on the classroom teacher. One thing that we're quick to do a lot of times is jump to interventions that may not fit the situation. So, one of the other things we're doing very consciously is really putting that focus on the classroom teacher teaching first best instruction. And if it doesn't catch, repeat it in a different way. So I didn't want to leave that out of the factor either.
Yeah, so it sounds like we're going to be kind of doing 2 things at one time. So one will be, collecting the data on how well the students are going with the feedback, but also some of that feedback sounds like it could be used for instruction as well. Because I took so in that graph that both of you all had about evidence not observed and those things. So those things were not observed. Like, how do we move those educators so that when you're doing walkthroughs, then you're going to be able to see those things observed?
Yep. So one thing we did is we took that data, right, and we looked at it, and we went through that with Joe Anderson and with our coach, and then said, okay, here's the areas where we need to focus in our BCS time around professional development. And so then the next month, we're building that into our learning pieces. 2 days a week, we spend looking at our EL education, specifically around learning targets, right? And then we've also layered on some assessment type pieces, because we saw that, okay, we need to give them a hand on how do we do some of those formative assessment pieces? What could that look like in the classroom? What are some strategies? We also allow them to share what examples of teachers, what they're already doing in their classroom, right? Because when you're in your classroom, you're kind of on an island, right? You don't get to go into other classrooms and see what's happening. So that gives an opportunity for those things. So that process data kind of feeds our professional development, our professional learning. It all works in tandem to kind of again, move that needle.
Okay.
Hello?
We can hear you, Mr. Jones.
All right, well, good. All right, good presentation, all of you guys. However, my first question is, why wasn't the situation dealt with in 218, 219? Any reason or explanation for that? You know, in 218, 219, they said they didn't give the test. Anybody know why?
There was a leadership transition and somehow it got missed. It was dealt with at the time, but once it wasn't given, there wasn't anything we could do.
You know, I really appreciate the work that you principals and superintendent do on these things, but the one thing I have to remember as a retired teacher and an administrator, these things change like every two or three years. And I think the basic thing that we ought to be looking at is, can our students read, write, and do arithmetic on grade point level? You can mix it up, you can chop it up, you can put it in MCAT or anything, but we really need to measure whether or not they're on grade level and they can do all those things proficiently. And that's just getting down to it. Unpack this, pack that, working on grade level, all that's good. But what I understood was, you got a staff that's 50% young. So in trying to implement this, you're implementing it with a younger staff, so they're learning. And I know how that goes, because as a teacher, every 2 to 3 years, they used to bring us this stuff from the state and confuse us and change us and trying to measure stuff. And what I found out as a teacher, keep it simple. Keep it simple, get the target dates for those students who are working on grade point level. Those who are not, continue to retest them and work with their weaknesses. But to be trying to use this data and work with these young teachers and have them try to figure out things, I just think it's a waste of time, because in 2 years, somebody's going to come from the state and say, we got another measurement tool. And for our students, because we're already behind, we need to stick to the basics and work those basics out. Now, my other question was, earlier this month, Ms. Martin had sent, I guess it was the superintendent, a particular website for you guys to look at as to whether or not it would fit into our educational learning situation. Did anybody take a look at what she sent to you?
I believe, Ms. Martin, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but that was the meeting owls. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Yep. We actually have 10 of the meeting owls in, and we've been testing them out and are hoping to get some teachers to pilot them. It's they're a unique device. They work pretty cool. So we're working with K-12 ETA to determine a way to implement them.
Okay. All right. Now, with the permission of the board president and anybody else, I would like to meet with the staff, teachers, auxiliary staff, building staff, because what we have to do right now is look at how we're going to get in-person learning here. We got approximately 3 to 4 months left of the school year. You've technically been out of school for almost a year coming to March. And if we don't make no strides and make no protocols to get back in school, we're going to lose all of this. And I understand in-home learning, I understand computer learning, but I also understand the area that we live in and the children that you're working with. You're working with poor, diverse children, and they just don't comprehend being at home like you think they should. And when I hear of other school districts making the effort to get in and work with this virus or whatever, and they're making strides, when I hear about parochial schools, the Catholics, the Christians, and all these people have been in school for most of the year. Now, they've been dealing with the same thing we have, but I just see us falling further and further behind. And you guys, I got to give it to you, trying your best with the technology. But from my experience in this area, our students need that in-person or hands-on situation. Now, what that means is, Superintendent Heitmeyer and you principals, you guys got to have a protocol for bringing them back in. Now, I haven't heard anything or seen anything, And that's why I want to meet with you and meet with the teaching staff, the auxiliary staff, you know, because you have to set something up. You have to set something up so when these kids walk back on campus, that you have a situation where you're taking temperatures at the door, you're counting students, okay? You got their mask ready, you got their mask ready for the day, you got their mask ready to go home. And the other thing that I'm concerned about is how many teachers on staff and auxiliary staff and paraprofessionals, lunch cafeteria staff have taken the COVID test. You know, remember what I said, when we open up, this thing may not come in through the children, it may come in from your staff. And if all this time your staff has been coming to campus and nobody's taking temperatures and nobody's documenting who's had the test, then how do we know who's going to need the vaccine? And that may be something you want to look into, ASPS. The state is looking at trying to get some money and open up in March. I would like to open up in March, but that leaves us March, April, May, and probably going to school through June. And then if you have to have a summer school, there's July, and then you're right back into school in August. So we need to have a plan right now for how we're going to open up. What doors are you going to use to come in? Who's going to be on them front doors taking temperatures? How do you deal with that? How many students you have in the class? The ventilation, I don't know if you've talked to maintenance and those people, but I would like to talk to them to find out what ventilation situation do we have. Do we have air conditioning? Do we have a venting situation that will pull the air out? See, one thing I know by working in there and being in this situation, when we used to have to deal with the flu and colds, we used to have to do some things like spray our rooms with Lysol to kill those germs, open up a window, you know. In the last couple of years, we've had a situation with the flu where you had to close school for about a week, 3, 4, 5 days. Then you turn around and give them a week off for the balanced calendar. We're losing time, folks. Our children are losing time. And when I hear other school districts talking about their kids is going to school and they're working through this, that's where we should be. We should be teaching how to handle this virus. We should be teaching the students, they can go home, and teaching the parents that these things need to be done. And then the teachers should be on board with 1, getting a COVID test to make sure they're not infected. 2, getting a vaccine if they want it. If not, they get a waiver as to why they don't want it. And then we move on. But, you know, I listen to all of this stuff. We're doing things online, but our students, it's like any other students they need in-person learning. And then with that comes the discipline of the child. Now they're talking K through 8. And for me, you have to designate doors that they're going to come in, who's going to be at that door, what classrooms. Right now, they're suggesting you can't use lockers. So how you going to work that out? Have we made the classrooms 6 feet or the desks, looking at the number of students? I know you explained some things to me, Mr. Heitmeyer, about a Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, Friday situation, but don't forget those seniors. 3 months, those seniors got to be looking at graduating and moving on. And if they're still on a computer system falling behind, and their counsel, whoever that may be, Nason or whoever, is not working with them to make sure they get their credits, then you got an issue when it comes to seniors this year. So these are the things that I'm concerned about. And like I said, I would like to meet with the staff. I would also like to have a list of school employees. Their names can be redacted, but I would like to see their address, teaching years experience, class that they're teaching, and whether or not they've had a COVID test, and do they plan on getting the vaccine. These
Mr.
things
Jones?
need to be known. Yeah.
Yeah, I just,
Yes.
yeah, a lot of the information that you talk about, there is a plan for that. And I'm sure that during the reconfirmation some of the information that you're asking may be in the next presentation. And so what I'm going to recommend that you do is that all the things that you are concerned about as far as how we're going to reopen schools, we've been working on that since the day school was closed a whole year ago. So there's a district team.
Yeah, that's what I mean, a whole year ago.
Yep, there's a district team network of about 25 people, including staff of all varieties, all of our contracted workers. So everything that you said, we do have a plan for that. Just because it hasn't been presented to you yet, doesn't mean that there's not a plan. So there is a plan available,
I like
and
to
there's
see
one
it.
ready.
I like to be
And you
part of
will.
that,
So what I'm going to suggest
meeting.
that you do is that after the meeting, Mr. Heitmeyer, if the information does not come up in the reconfirmation COVID-19 plan that's coming up next, that you make an appointment to meet with Mr. Heitmeyer, and he will give you that plan that the D&D team has been working on. We had it, and we just had a meeting last week to finalize a couple of things. So every last thing you said is
So
in
was
the
there a
plan
plan with
that
that
is written
team?
out.
Was there a plan or a date to open?
The date to open is going to be March 1st that the governor set for schools to provide in-person learning.
Okay.
So there is an entire plan. Trust me, everything you said, we have been working very diligently. So the thing is, just
All right,
because
well,
you have not heard
I can
about
make
it
an
yet
appointment.
doesn't mean we've been working. So we're going to make sure that you get
All right.
that
I think as a
plan.
board member, we should talk about it.
Yeah, well, this is just your second meeting. So a lot of this information has been communicated prior to this meeting. So that's why I want to get you caught up, because all the things that you're asking for right now, we do have that. We just won't be able to deliver it to you right now, but some of the answer to your question could be in the second presentation under reconfirmation of the COVID-19 plan. Some of the other information you're asking for is personal health information, which will not be released because that would be illegal, but we can talk about that at a different, at a different, more
What's personal
appropriate
health
time.
information?
Healthcare information of employees.
My question is, what is considered? Say that again.
I was saying some of
I didn't hear
the
you.
personal, some of the, whether or not individuals get COVID testing, some of that is protected health information. So that probably may not be able to be released to us, but some of the stuff that we're talking about, we'll need to talk about at a later date within the meeting or after the meeting. But there is a plan.
Well, I'm just on campus.
There is a plan.
If they're going to be teaching our students, then we should
Yep.
know whether or not they've been exposed or they're walking around symptomatic and don't know it, if they're going to take the vaccine, because that's going to cause us.
You know what, Mr. Jones,
Maybe-
believe it or not, most of the staff is concerned about the same things you're concerned about. So they're being very proactive, and they want to have the vaccination. They want it because they want it.
So the ones that have been coming on campus, right? You've had staff coming on campus, right?
On March 1st, we're going to have staff will
I'm
be
talking
on
about
campus.
Prior to that, we've had staff that's been coming on campus working.
Yes.
Some
Is
have
that
come in.
correct? Okay, so are they being checked, their temperature and things of that nature?
We have a screener that we ask them to fill out every time they come on campus.
Thank you. Okay, let's move on. Maybe we'll get those questions answered.
All right. Are there any other data related questions for Mr. Cromwell or Mr. Mangum or Mr. Heitmeyer? If there is, then we can definitely take those maybe separately at a later time. So we'll move on to our COVID-19 plan. And Mr. Heitmeyer, you got your presentation ready for us?
I do.
Awesome.
All right, so this is going to be our return to in-person learning. Oh, come on. It is our reconfirmation hearing number 5, but it is also our return to in-person learning presentation. Again, our mission is preparing students for the promise of tomorrow. We have to do this every month through this school year. We have to reconfirm how instruction is going to be delivered during the 2020-2021 school year. We have to accept public comments from parents and or guardians on our extended learning plan, and we need to review weekly two-way interaction rates. So we have offered the same information each month. This will change next month when I give this presentation, but this summarizes that we have been remote through the year. This summarizes the weekly two-way interaction rates. If you look at week 3, at the middle school, we were at 53%. That happened to be our testing week. So we ran into some similar data problems last October when we did NWEA in October. We didn't quite fall that far, but we did rebound the following week. As we prepare to discuss our return to learn, I want to highlight, we're all, us, our kids, everybody, are living through a pandemic. And for the most part, it is unprecedented. And it hasn't been easy, and it won't be easy. I'm highlighting with everybody who will listen that grace matters at this point, and relationships count more than ever. Want you to think about that as we discuss this information. Even more reminders in our community. And when I talk about our community, I mean everybody. I mean us. I mean our families, our employees, our students. There are profound unmet needs that we've encountered. And it's with health, relational, food, shelter, mobility, internet access. These are things we have to remember. These are things people have faced for almost a year now. Well, probably longer than that, but it's really become highlighted in the last year. So we did a survey of our families to determine who intended to return to in-person learning and who wants to continue virtual. We did not get 100% of responses, but we did follow up with the other families. But the survey result, 77.7% requested in person, so coming back to school, and 22.2% requested virtual. Now that breaks down, interestingly, at the elementary, 84% want to come back to in-person. At the middle school, it's 75%, and at the senior high, it's 67%. So as the kids get older, the virtual learning apparently works better, or they're more comfortable with it. So we have around 88 who want to continue virtual. So about 20% of our population want to continue with virtual learning. So we put a lot of thought into what the daily schedule could look like. And we have to take into consideration all kids, because we have some special ed kids who go to different campuses. We have ASM Tech, we have Career Tech Center, we have some college students. So we have to think about how the day can be structured for all students. One of the things that we are going to include is Wednesday as an asynchronous day, and a day for teachers to prepare their videos and lessons for the students who remain virtual, because they're not going to be able to spend as much time with them virtually as they have. That's where the meeting owls can come in to support that. We're looking at an altered day of instruction in person from 9:30 to 3:30 with 7:45 to 8:25 as our BCS time, 8:30 to 9:25 to focus on remote instruction, work with those remote kids, and then 9:30 to 3:30, the regular in-person instruction for the day. And that is what we felt at the district network team was best for all kids. So to clarify some expectations, we are asking parents to screen their kids. We are not going to screen them as they come in and take their temperature as they come in. We're asking parents to do that at home. Staff will continue to screen daily using the link on our doors. Everyone will wear masks at all times. That's a requirement right now, and that is our expectation. It does create some concern, and we're trying to find some ways to figure out some mask breaks and some things like that, because our kids who've been learning virtually for a year haven't necessarily had to have their masks on all day, nor have the teachers. So we know that that's a necessary requirement, but we're trying to figure out some ways to build in some mask breaks. We're going to keep kids and people as far apart as possible, knowing that sometimes the full 6 feet is just not going to be possible. We're going to do our best to do that. And staff will spray desks, and students will wipe desks at change times as those are necessary. So COVID symptoms, the CDC lists about 11 different symptoms. And if we followed all of these symptoms every day with all of our staff and all of our kids, there's a chance we would have nobody on campus. So the big ones that we are going to put a focus on are the fever or chills, the cough, the nausea or vomiting, new loss of sense of taste or smell, and diarrhea. Now, if there's combinations when kids get sent down of some of the other ones, we'll take those into consideration. But these are the ones that are, they're no-brainers, and we're going to get in touch with the family and recommend a COVID test. Our current timeline is tonight's meeting. We're having an all-staff meeting to roll this out a little more on Thursday. Next week, we will begin having everybody report back. Monday is a little bit open because a lot of our staff on Friday and Saturday will be getting their second COVID test. And we told them, vaccination, excuse me. We told those staff if they're having symptoms, it is all right to continue to teach from home on Monday. But next week, we want to get everybody in and get them used to being in school again. And then Friday, there will be virtual PD. And then Monday, March 1st, we'll start back with in-person learning. We're working on an FAQ, a frequently asked questions, to try to answer as many of those questions as possible. And I can send that out to you guys as board members. It's in draft form. It's not 100% complete, but that aims to answer a lot of the questions, some of the questions that you asked, Mr. Jones. But overall, we've been working with Axiom to make sure we can keep the building clean at all times. We have some special Clorox devices that will be used in rooms on a daily basis. There's a lot of creative things going into the plan. We are going to eat in classrooms at the elementary, and that's going to create additional garbage and additional cans. So there's a lot of different things that have been thought about and discussed. We have discussed this with the staff as we put it together to make sure that they are on board and understand the full idea of keeping everybody safe. So this kind of summarizes what I'm talking about right now. But we spent a lot of time last week with the district network team talking through a lot of these issues. They raise good questions. We do additional research. But the bottom line is we're going to do everything we can to keep everybody safe and to keep school open. I'm not saying that we won't have cases and we won't have to shut down certain grades. I still get regular messages from my fellow superintendents, and they're having to take action to close certain grades or close certain buildings. Luckily in the last year, we haven't had to do that because we have been remote. And I think that's worked well because we've been able to be consistent, and our students have been able to stay focused on their education, though it's a little different than usual. So that's a lot to throw at you in a short time. Again, I can send you guys that frequently asked questions. But if you have any questions or need any clarification, we'll be meeting again a month from now, and we'll probably, talk at length about how the first couple of weeks went and determine what the next part of the plan will be. But the governor wants schools to reopen on March 1st or by March 1st. And we believe that we can safely meet that deadline, knowing full well that there are going to be possible spreads and those kind of things. But we'll be ready to do the contact tracing and chase things down and keep people informed and quarantine as we need to. It's not going to be easy. I highlighted that earlier. I mean, nothing about the last year's been easy. So I'm open to questions, or if anybody on the DNT wants to add anything that I didn't include there, please do.
Mr. Heimeyer, I have a question. Why are we leaving it up to the parents to do like the temperature checks and so forth?
The biggest reason is that we just think that would take a lot of time to do those temperature checks when kids arrive. And when we get them here, we don't want them to be backed up and, part of them waiting outside. It just probably would not be a smooth operation. That's the biggest concern. I mean, we're not necessarily prepared to do something like that.
And then the other issue would be, if we're doing temperature checks once they got to school, I mean, then there's going to be a mass group of students, let's say, that had a temperature above what the CDC says is a good temperature. How will we get all those students back to where would Dollaride just put them back on the bus and take them right back?
Yes. Personally, I think Dollaride.
That's a logistical.
There could be a logistical thing.
I think it's by cutting it off at the head and not having kids who possibly could have symptoms to expose more kids on the bus and then expose kids once they get to school.
Is it possible
Mr.
for
Heitmeyer?
maybe to check before they enter onto the bus?
Repeat that, Ms. Hill.
Would it
Mrs.
be a
Hill.
problem if maybe Dollaride can maybe check the students before they enter onto the bus?
I don't know that Dial-A-Ride would be willing to do that.
If we ask them,
Mr. Heitmeyer, what are other schools in the areas doing? I know that West Shore does not check when they come in at the center. They have a form that the parents send in. To what you're saying is that the parents are responsible. What are the other schools in our area doing?
I don't know anybody who is checking temperatures when kids get there. But if anybody does know of that, let me know. But I don't think anybody around us is checking temperatures when kids arrive.
Thank you.
just think it's a good thing to do.
Yeah,
Set up.
Yeah.
I think that's,
yeah,
that way we can stop.
I
I'm
kind of
sorry,
agree
Joe.
with, yeah, that's okay. I kind of agree with Mr. Jones and Mrs. Martin. I mean, this was a big deal for the past 7-8 months. We couldn't move without having some type of COVID check or mask wearing. And now all of a sudden, the schools are going to be open, carte blanche, for people just to come in and go as they please. I don't get that. I just don't. So, is it that we have to maybe have a staff member on the bus? When the kids get on the bus, they can, I mean, if they've got an extreme temperature of 3 or 4 or 5 degrees that's above normal, do you really want to take that chance and having to shut the school back down again? I mean, I know it's a problem and it's an issue, but, well, what are we doing here?
So why
I
they
work
leave
up
their
at-
house if they had 100, if their temperature was 5 degrees above?
Well, that's what I'm saying. If you had a staff member on the bus and the kid comes to the bus and he's got 110 temperature, 104, 105 degree temperature, he stays home.
Well, that's why we're gonna ask the
Right.
parent to do it, so that then the kid wouldn't even get to the bus.
I
But
don't
we
think
can't even
I
get
don't
the
think-
parents to fill out the doggone, we can't even get the parents to fill out the papers to find out how many kids want to come in versus how many are going to virtual. How many parents return those forms, Mr. Heitmeyer?
We had around 200 returns or so. I mean, we got, I mean, it wasn't 100%, but we got a pretty decent return on those surveys. But I mean, to answer your question, I think we've got to rely on the parents to screen their kids. You know, I don't think that we put that on our staff or our school to do a temperature check every day. I mean, if they're not feeling well, we can do a temperature check, but you know, they're gonna be masked up. They're going to be as distanced as possible. We're not going to use lockers. So, you know, if we notice any symptoms or the kids bring up symptoms, then we can check temperature. But I really think it's a logistical nightmare waiting to happen to try to do all those temperatures every day.
Is it asking too much to have a bus attendant for $1 ride? Because I'm knowing my mother was a bus attendant for the Detroit Board of Education for years. And a bus attendant for the school would be something that would stop a lot of different other issues that goes on. I understand we should rely on the parent, but me being a parent that had 4 kids going, trying to rush everybody out to school, sometimes we forget things. I understand, taking temperature is important, but also leaving that to the parents' hands and send them on the bus. What if that didn't happen? Then we still spreading. Just coming from, a parent that has kids that go to the school and is very, very concerned about spreading the COVID.
One of the things I had suggested in my thank you letter was having the parents sign up for teen health. I think if you told me, Rick, that because it was a federal program, in order for our students to be serviced by them, they had to be signed up. And I think in this time of COVID, we should be requesting our parents to sign our children up so teen health can get involved in this. For them to sit down on campus and not have no commitment to this or no buy-in to this, it's just there. They're just there. But if you're telling me that they have to be signed up, then we explain to the parents, in order to fight this COVID, we want your child to sign up. Now, you don't have to take your child to teen health, but in order for teen health to get, or the child adolescent center to get involved, so they can stand at the door and take temperatures. But if they can't, because they're not on the child is not on the roll, then they're just sitting there taking up space, because we can't send the child to them if they get sick, right? If they're not on the roll. Is that correct?
Correct.
So, I mean, we should just have a school nurse.
I'd like to make a statement too. Not all children who have COVID have fevers. So you might get some of the kids that have with the fever. I understand that, but there's still going to be kids who come with other symptoms that the parents are going to have to be responsible for, because if we check temperatures at the door, but they have other symptoms and they have COVID, they're still going to come into the school, because just because you don't have a temperature doesn't mean you don't have COVID.
That's why we want
Especially
parents
children,
to
from what I understand, from what I've read.
And Mrs.
There's
Case,
a call.
to add on to that, what we've seen a lot is that kids are asymptomatic. They don't even have any symptoms, but they have it. So you're not going to catch those either.
So the parent wouldn't catch them either. Right?
True.
If the child know they have it, then the parent don't have it. And then we got a situation on campus. I agree with Ms. Peasky that the fact that there's not always a temperature situation, but I think we should be proactive. I mean, it may cause a log jam, it may cause some things until we get disciplined, but these children are coming back to school after being out of school approximately 7 months, so there has to be some discipline in how to treat this. We just can't be running in thinking we're back in school, let's have a great time, and we're gonna be with our friends. And then we neglect to take a step, a simple step that may cause us some log jam. The next thing you know, we're shutting down in 2 weeks. I mean, and then that's the situation with the teachers.
But I don't, if none of the other schools in our area find it necessary to do temperature checks, I'm not sure that that's something that we really seriously need to think about. I think we just need to be more diligent on asking the parents for sure, please check for symptoms before you leave. The teachers in the school, anybody who notices anything, if the kids get sick, we're on that. We're going to get COVID in this school. More than likely it's going to happen. Even if we do temperature checks, even whatever things we put into place, it's going to happen more than likely. And we are going to have to give our kids some grace because they haven't seen each other in so long. And I can't imagine what the first 2 weeks are going to be like. They're going to be back in school and it's going to be kind of crazy. But, I don't know. That's just my opinion. I thank you.
I think an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. That's the way I see it. So, and then as far as other schools have been attempting this for the last several months. We're just getting into the game, but we should really have a better plan than them since they've been in the game and they had some experimentation with closing some things down and reopening and being closed 2 weeks. We got about 4 months of school left. It's not a lot of time to do what the two principals said in their presentation as far as measuring this or measuring that, plus to try to get some child on track. However, good presentation, you're right. A lot of my questions were answered. However, I would still like to, I think there's a meeting you got with the all staff. I'd like to be invited to that. One of the things that does concern me at this point is the turnover in staff and what that age looks like in working with these children. That concerns me a little bit.
I would like to add though, I mean, we're not talking about throwing the doors open to the school. I mean, we're cohorting our students. We have procedures for entry and exit of the building. We're walking kids to the buses. We're keeping them 6 feet apart. They're masked. If they're not masked, we have masks ready at the door so that they have that. They're not even allowed on the bus without a paper mask. There are paper masks on the bus. There are things, there's the minutia of all of this that we did not get into. And I think a lot of that comes into that frequently asked questions document that Mr. Heitmeyer has referred to. And there's other things that, quite honestly, we're going to learn as you do it on the fly, right? Because there are some things that you just can't account for. And we even had some of that when we brought kids in for testing, right? We had to make some adjustments and be responsive to those things in a timely manner and learn from those pieces. But we've adjusted how we do student drop off. We've adjusted, where we have students enter into the building, where they exit through the building, where they dismissal is not a free for all. It's at very specific times. We release two grades at a time. They come down different hallways. We keep them as separate as possible. We have them going up one side of the hallway and down another side of the hallway. We have them using one stairwell and not another stairwell. There's a lot to this from a logistics standpoint. That again is the minutia piece of this. But what we're presenting is kind of the big picture piece.
Well, I appreciate you sharing that. I really do. That makes me feel a lot better, you sharing that those things have been thought out.
Any other questions or comments before we move to principal reports? Oh, were you done, Mr. Heitmeyer?
I am done.
Okay. So principal reports, Mr. Cornwell, you're up.
Thank you. I'm going to keep it real brief because we've covered a lot of ground already. I just wanted to give you a quick update on EWIMS. I mentioned a little bit already about what the EWIMS team is planning. We met with the leadership at Manistee Public Schools last week, and we meet with Karen Miller, I believe her name is, from the Shiawassee RESA next week. They do a countywide EWIMS. So we're getting an opportunity to connect with people that are have put this in place and answer some of our questions as we get started. Other than that, we're working through all those details that we just discussed on getting kids back into the building, and I'm sure we'll learn as we go and hopefully head off as many problems ahead of time as we can. Thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you. Any questions, comments?
Yes, I have a question. Garth, as far as the EWIMS program, do you think there'll ever be a time when we'll have to have intervention for 1 or 2 students, or is this something that can be done in a mass? You know, I was looking at the presentation from before, and it looked like you put in some preventions where the things begin to move upward. But how many times do you think you'll have to do that? And are there quite a few students that are in that category? I see, like, for some of those pie charts, you had 50%, and then you went up to 54% with yes, understanding what they needed to understand in order to move on. Do you ever see a situation where, like, kind of like what we do with in our elementary, pulling kids out and having them perhaps on a one-on-one type of situation in order to get them back into the
so EWIMS
hold of
works
things?
on the multi-tiered system of support model, where you have tier 1 intervention, which is basically instruction for all, and then your tier 2 and tier 3 are focused on that 15% and 5% based on need. We may get to the point, based on what we're seeing in our data, that we need to find an interventionist that can do some pull-out type things. We may need to restructure how we do some parapro work at the secondary, middle school level. Do I think we'll get down to the one-on-one? Maybe at some point. I think right now we have a pretty big need with a pretty significant number of kids that we can do a lot of things right in the classroom and cover some of those interventions.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Okay, Mr. Mangum?
Yeah, like as Mr. Cornwell mentioned, we talked through quite a few of these pieces already. I do want to kind of talk about my processes piece. Like I said, in January and February, teachers continued their work of the implementation of the EL curriculum. We had Laurel Davis out again on January 29th, and we're layering on. We're still working on those targets, those learning target pieces, but now we're layering on these engagement pieces as well to keep students engaged in that process and interacting with the content. And so that's kind of our next steps in that piece. And currently staff is working with Laurel to identify some focus areas for a new instructional walkthrough piece, right? So that we'll be measuring those engagement strategies as well. And so they're not only looking at the learning target pieces, but also adding to those engagement pieces, and that will become part of our walkthrough tool in that implementation process. And then the other piece I just wanted to touch on was that, as I mentioned before, we have moved to these ideas of short cycles and looking at things in more timely manner of about 4-week cycles. Those committees met actually this week for the first time and started to do some goal setting around those pieces, specifically around our March 1st opening. So what are some pieces in place that we want to make sure that are going to help us close that gap in reading? What are some very specific things that we want to do on March 1st around increasing those math scores and starting to close that gap? And also specifically, what are some things we want to put in place from a culture and climate standpoint, right? From a student behavior piece to make sure that students are ready to engage in that work. And so looking at what are some things that we need to do. We're looking at taking those first few days of school to really look at reteaching what it is to be in school, right? Because we got to have routines. We have to have expectations. We have to teach them all of the new protocols, right? And procedures around mask wearing, around cleaning of the desks, around keeping, what is recess look like, right? Because and what does it mean to be cohorted? All of those things. And so we're diving into all of those pieces as well this week as we roll out and prepare for that March 1st opening.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you both. Any questions for Mr. Mangum? If not, this is our first communication area. If there's anyone out there in the public who has a comment for the Board of Education. All right. Trent Master says there's no comments, so we'll keep rolling right along. Discussion items. Do you want to talk about these items there, Mr. Heitmeyer?
Yes, I do. Having trouble with the mute button tonight. So discussion item number 1 is to consider the candidate to represent Region 3 on the Michigan Association of School Boards board. The 5 candidates for our region are Candace Boysen from Mona Shores, Catherine Downs Lewis from Grand Rapids Public Schools, Jill Fennessy from Tri-County Area Schools, Ryan Good from Hesperia Community Schools, and Diane Ybarra from Holland Public Schools. The only one that I really know is Mrs. Fennessy from Tri-County. I've talked to her quite a bit at the different MASB workshops that we've gone to. I don't know if any of you know any of the others, but I would recommend electing her. I think she may be the president of MASB this year as well. So
She is awesome, Mr. Heitmeyer.
that's what my recommendation would be there. So then consider the ORS 3% closing agreements. This closing agreement is intended to be made available to Michigan public school districts that would like a determination from the IRS on their tax obligations with respect to employees who did not exercise the one-time irrevocable election to opt out a future right to receive retiree health benefits under the Michigan Public School Employees Retirement System, and who continue to be subject to a 3% resolution. Mr. Forrester, would you be willing to summarize my summary, please?
Sure. In 2010, ORS mandated a 3% healthcare contribution from employees. And at that time, there was little guidance on how to handle it. This particular settlement agreement handles the tax from tax years 2013 through tax year 2026. So by entering into the agreement, we assure that the tax treatment that the IRS basically has agreed to will be intact. Now, there are several groups of school districts because everybody handled this a little bit differently. We are in group 1 because we actually did not withhold FICA between tax years 2013 and the present. So some school districts are going to be required to issue W-2Cs and possibly do protective claims. We are not going to have to do that. However, for 2010 through 12, we did subject the 3% to FICA, and I can't remember when I did the protective claims, but it was 8 years ago, possibly, and those protective claims are still out there. So this basically is going to assure the tax treatment of the 3% healthcare for the next 5 years. So what the board's going to be approving is essentially it's giving the right to an ORS attorney to enter into this agreement on behalf of the board. There's a $3,000 fee for each school district. However, ORS is covering that fee. So it will be at no cost to us.
Thank you.
And item number 3 is to consider some donations. The Woodard family made a $200 donation that will go to their children's classes. And the Zion Lutheran Church donated $1,000 to help with the cost of MiFi devices. So pretty cool.
That is very nice. Oh, great. Any questions, comments? About 1, 2, or 3? I think the only person I know for the Region 3 is Jill as well from the MASB. People probably would have got some stuff in their emails, and there was definitely like an autobiography of some of the people's information, but Jill's the only one I know as well. Okay, this is our last and final communication. Did anyone pop up since a couple minutes ago? Nope. Okay, then we will go down to our action items. So the consent agenda items would be A, B, C, and D. I think 2 will require consider a motion. Well, we'll have to do roll call votes on all of them to make sure everybody gets in there. So under the consent agenda items, considering voting for the recommendation that Mr. Heitmeyer put forth for the representative Region 3 on the MASB board. Does someone have any other recommendation prior to Jill? What's her last name? Tennessee?
Tennessee, yep.
Tennessee. Okay. And then the second one is to accept the donations from the Woodward and family and Zion Lutheran Church. And then to accept the motion for the February 2021 reconfirmation report and relevant recommendations. And then 3 will be the consideration to have the enter into an agreement for the ORS 3% closing agreement. So those are the consent agenda items. So we'll set forth, is there a motion to accept the consent agenda items as presented?
I'll make a motion
Thank you. It's been motioned by
to
Mrs.
accept. Go ahead. Sorry.
No, that's okay. It's been motioned by Ms. Peaskey to accept the consent agenda items as presented. Is there a second or support?
I'll second it.
Second by Ms. Mary Martin. Are there any questions or comments to the motion? Madam Secretary, we will need a roll call vote, please.
Okay. Joe Brooks.
My mute button's not working. Aye.
Latanya Hill.
Aye.
Paul John Salam.
Aye.
Mary Carter is not, he's absent. Mary Martin.
Aye.
Sean Washington.
Aye.
Miriam Peaskey, aye.
Motion carried. Thank you. And then now we have the superintendent items.
I really am having trouble with the mute button. I apologize. I'll talk about a few things. I know we've been going a long time, but I do have some things I do want to share. Under the idea of leadership and capacity, I just want to continue to highlight our working with Dr. Dominique Smith. I think I write about this every week in 5 Bullet Friday, but it has just been a positive experience for our team to learn from him. And last week, they in California are not quite ready to open schools yet, but we actually got into quite a conversation with him about this process. And it was kind of cool because he was looking to us to answer some questions he had, and it's always us asking him questions. So it was quite a great conversation, and we have appreciated that. He brought some of his team last week, some of his teachers to work with us. We've been talking to a lot about the unpacking of standards and making those visible and making them in student-friendly terms. And he brought some teachers who were really passionate about that. And they showed us their virtual classrooms and how they break things down and put them in kid terms. Very powerful. We look forward to continuing to learn. We do have a district PD day coming up next Friday, and elementary will be working on EL education, and secondary will be working on some technology stuff with K-12 ETA. To talk about systems, we are finally in the home stretch of the retention bonus using 21H funds. It's taken a little while to get there, but they have been approved. It's a 5% bonus for our staff, and it's a retention bonus. This was actually recommended by the partnership office because we've expressed the number of staff that we've turned over. So we've worked with them on that. So we're excited to be able to do that. We will do a letter of agreement with both unions and probably bring that for you guys to look at next month. But we're excited to be able to provide that for our staff. And also, we're going to use some 21H funds for some professional development. And we kind of alluded to it earlier when we said we don't really have the opportunity to get into other folks' classrooms. Working with Joe Anderson from the ESD, we're going to get some piloted groups to get into other classrooms and do some observations and share some discussions about what's going on, specifically in English language arts instruction to start off. So, hopefully we can make this a part of the culture long term, because there is so much to be gained when you're sharing thoughts on what's going on in the classroom. As we've mentioned, we purchased quite a bit of technology with COVID funds, and it is currently being installed. We're excited that this is going to be a great addition. These tools are going to allow us to continue some of the things that we've started in our one-to-one world that we didn't know we were going to start a year ago. But we did talk to K-12 ETA about hiring an additional person to work with Mr. Filter. We took part in interviews with them last Friday, and the director, Josh Hayes, is working to get that person secured. So, we're just going to add so many tools that Mr. Filter is not going to have time to focus on that, as well as the day-to-day things that he already works on. And we talked to K-12 ETA about this possibly not being a long-term thing, but probably for a couple years, we're going to need this additional support. So we're excited about the candidate that we're looking at. And finally, to talk about one process, we've been working on this basically since I got to Baldwin a few years ago, and the program may even have had a slightly different name at the time, but starting next week, Susan Mercer is going to be on site with Pathways to Potential. We just think that this is going to allow us to support the community in ways that we haven't been able to. But it's also going to allow us to bring some of our partners closer together and be able to really get down to the nitty gritty. We're working with the same kids. Every entity in our community is working with the same kids, and there's just, and it's not just us. I mean, it's all over the place. There's just no cohesion, and we just see this as a way to really create that cohesion, because we truly are working with the same families, and to provide these supports, it's going to be awesome. So the head of the program has been very supportive, and ever since we started the conversation a few years ago, we've tried to figure out how to do it. Then of course the pandemic got in the way. We were going to start a year ago, but everything is signed and sealed, and Monday we'll have the delivery. So that's really exciting, and that is my report. I tried to keep it as brief as possible.
Thank you. Are any questions for Mr. Heitmeyer? Comments? Board member items? Okay. If I hear none, I'm assuming all hearts are clear for the evening. I want to thank everyone for showing up tonight. Mr. Heitmeyer, do you have any prediction about how we will meet in the month of March? I'll wait for you to come off mute. You do have some predictions. Okay, I'm not a good mouth reader, but I got that.
The latest order goes through March 28th. So we believe that we'll have to be virtual next month. There is some discussion about giving some flexibility, but I haven't heard much more about that. So I really think in March we'll probably be doing it this way one more time.
Okay, thank you for that. So thank everyone for showing up tonight. Thank you for all your awesome questions and input. Thank you for both of the building principals for doing the work of putting that data together. Thank your teams for all the work that they're doing. We know there's a lot of work that's going on, and it does take some time to turn a big ship around, but I know that we're definitely working on doing that. So thank you to my colleagues. And if there's nothing else, we'll make a motion to dismiss this evening at 7:52 p.m.
Make that motion, dismiss at 7:52 p.m. Hi, Ms. Meyer, thank you for the information forwarded to me.
Great. It's been motioned by Mr. Jones. Was there a second by Mr. Brooks?
Yes, ma'am.
That's what it was. Awesome. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
I'm gonna say no one opposes.
Aye.
So, all right. Everybody have a good night.
All right, good
Thank
night,
you too,
everyone.
Trent.